Okay, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and the Dream trailer for Doctor Strange 2 just released today, which, by the way, I know a lot of you guys are waiting like 30 minutes to an hour to try to get tickets for Doctor Strange 2. I got mine right off the bat. Like, I was up at like 7 a.m. and I immediately got tickets. The way that I did it, check the website for your local theater. That's what I did. Don't use like AMC or Fandango or something like that because everybody's using those. But look up the website for your local theater and see if you can grab tickets that way. That's how I got mine. But nonetheless, this trailer was cool, but it also got me thinking. I mean, there's not a whole lot of new footage, but the new footage that we get is pretty significant and pretty impactful. So here's the idea that I have here. And there is one major caveat to this that kind of stands out and just sort of blows it out of the water, is maybe not necessarily being all that credible. But I want to talk about, like, obviously the statement that Scarlet Witch made, where like her and Doctor Strange basically say the same thing, right? Like, you know, every night I have the same dream and every day I have the same nightmare, or something along those lines, right? So I want to talk about these potential dream sequences they're having, because there's kind of a similarity among them, right? So take, for example, the idea of the dream versus the idea of the nightmare. So the dream, as you would expect, just by nature of it being a dream, is like a happy thing, a hopeful thing, a good thing, right? Something along those lines. And then let's say, of course, the nightmare would be like the dark and the evil thing. Now, there are scenes that we've gotten over the course of the trailers that share similarities. So take, for example, the sequence that we get in the trailer. It's only a momentary scene where like the double doors open and then it shows this giant staircase that leads up into seemingly oblivion, right? That coloring in that scene right there is the exact same coloring that you get, or looks like the exact same coloring that you get in the scene where Doctor Strange is talking to his evil counterpart. But it also looks like the same coloring that you get when like everything is falling apart, right? Like everything is dissolving. Like it all has that kind of light blue faded tinge to it, right? So imagine, for example, that those double doors open up and Doctor Strange goes through those doors, and that in turn, when he gets up to the top of that stairwell, it's the city of New York, totally falling apart, right? Like dissolving, falling to pieces. You guys know the scene that I'm talking about from the trailer. And so the last thing left is a Sanctum Sanctorum, which is dissolving and falling apart. And like there's water and everything everywhere. So he goes in there, he goes up the stairs of the Sanctum Sanctorum, and that's when he sees his evil counterpart, right? The one that busts out the third eye in the most recent trailer. That's his nightmare scene. The scene that leads into that, I'm not entirely sure, because what it looks like with Palmer, right, with her getting married, it looks like that's actually happening. Now, maybe that is a real world thing, or maybe that is a dream that he's experiencing. I don't know why he would dream that the love of his life is marrying someone else and it makes him happy, right? Like, I wouldn't dream that. That would be a nightmare sequence for me. It'd be a horrible situation. I would be like, God, this is awful. You know, I wouldn't be like, the love of my life, she married someone else. Yay. Like that was not what I would, that's not how I would do things, right? So Christine Palmer marrying somebody else, maybe that's just like actually happening, right? But focusing on that dark colored hinge, that dark colored hue on the screen in those sequences, right? That's Doctor Strange's nightmare sequence. Now, there's another nightmare sequence he experiences, which is the one that looks like Zombie Strange. And that would explain why in the scene where he's like climbing up the mountain or whatever it is, and like he's been turned into a zombie, that like he looks at his hand and the look on his face is like, what in the hell is going on, right? Like, I don't understand this. Like, someone's manipulating his dreams. That's his sequence. Right? Now we switch over to the Scarlet Witch. Now, one of the things to point out here, and this is where I think things are murkier with her than it is with Stephen Strange, because it's pretty straightforward. With the Scarlet Witch, there's a bunch of scenes that we get that are all like red tinge, right? They have a red hue to them. Like, you guys remember when the trailer dropped and you had that scene where Doctor Strange was talking to Wanda, and there's one scene where he's talking to her and everything looks normal. She's dressed like a normal person. She doesn't look like the Scarlet Witch or anything, and the colors are all normal. But then there's that exact same scene, seemingly in that same moment, when he's talking to her and she looks like the Scarlet Witch, it's got a red hue, but Doctor Strange's clothes don't change, right? So maybe that's not necessarily a nightmare sequence, maybe that is actually happening. But what I think may be going on here with the Scarlet Witch is there's what she thinks is happening and there's what's actually happening. That in the scene from the trailer when Doctor Strange breaks out the third eye, that's the eye of Agamotto. Now, technically speaking, seeing the Eye of Agamotto exists in a couple different forms. In the first Doctor Strange movie where he had the amulet that contained the Time Stone, technically in the comics, that contains the Eye of Agamotto. And whenever he uses it, it establishes his third eye. And what that does is it allows him to see through illusions. It allows him to see what's actually going on there. And so potentially that could be what's happening, right? That in that dream sequence, when his evil version busts out the Eye of Agamotto, it's casting aside the illusion and it's showing what's really going on. That Nightmare is manipulating behind the scenes, right? So at that point, Nightmare starts going after Scarlet Witch, or maybe he's been going after her the whole time. I'm not entirely sure. I don't really know how he fits in there, assuming he even is in the movie, although in the trailer they said Nightmare, so obviously that means Nightmare is in the movie. Hope you guys can tell I'm just dripping with sarcasm here. But the thing about this is that Wanda has that moment where she's sitting in front of her kids, right? Where like her kids are there. And she's like, oh my God, I found my kids. Right now that could very well be her nightmare sequence, where the reality is her kids are like, you let us die, Mom. You and like they turn evil, right? Like, and then maybe she has to kill them, she has to destroy them. And that's why she's got blood on the front of her or something along those lines. I have no real idea, right? But whatever it is, like her seeing her kids, that it's not real. And that's her nightmare. Her nightmare is she finally finds her kids only for them to like disappear or only for her to have to destroy them or something along those lines. Now, the question has to be asked, if this is the case, right? I feel like the Doctor Strange aspect or the Doctor Strange dream sequence has more meat and potatoes to it than the one with Wanda, because if every nightmare sequence Wanda has is clouded in red, right? It's got a red tinge to it. Then how do we explain the scene where like she's fighting alongside Wong and you've got those monsters that either she summoned or that are cornering them, right? Backing them into a corner or whatever it is. I don't really know. Like, how do you explain that? You know, how do you explain the scene where like Wanda is the Scarlet Witch and everything's red? She's talking to Doctor Strange, but then at the same time, she's talking to him as her normal self and Doctor Strange's clothes don't change, right? That perhaps there's what we see and then there's what's actually going on, or what Wanda really believes is going on, that kind of a thing. I don't know. It's really, really murky when it comes to her side of things. But a couple of the other big things that go on here, and these are actually really, really huge, is I was thinking about Spider-Man No Way Home and how we watched that movie and then it basically turned out that Spider-Man Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home were basically just a trilogy origin story. And we didn't know that until Aunt May died, and right before she did, she said, with great power must come great responsibility. And it's like, damn, this has all been an origin story. Like, wow, okay. Kudos, MCU. This is kind of mind-blowing, right? It's the thing that none of us really suspected. Or maybe some people did. I didn't really suspect it. But maybe that's what's going on with Doctor Strange, right? Because right now, if you look at the history of Stephen Strange in the MCU, there's a lot of things that don't necessarily make sense if he truly is the Sorcerer Supreme. Number one, Stephen Strange and the fight with Thanos on Titan, that fight would have been 5 seconds long. No way Stephen Strange, with the full totality of the power available to him, would have lost to Thanos. That never would have happened, right? Never would have taken place. And it doesn't matter whether Thanos had the Infinity Gauntlet or not. Like, it would, no. That never would have worked, right? There have been ample times in old school Doctor Strange stories, right? Like the 60s and 70s, when you could have been like, yeah, Doctor Strange was more powerful than the Infinity Gauntlet, right? The guy was just like a multiversal force of power. It was just crazy how OP he was. The reason why I say this is because in the trailer, we get our first real tangible look at the Book of the Vishanti. For those of you guys who don't know what that means, the Book of the Vishanti is ridiculously important to the Doctor Strange mythos because like 80% of his power comes from the Book of the Vishanti, right? So what we could do here is assuming the movie is following anything remotely close to the comic book counterpart regarding like the source of Stephen Strange's power, how that power works, and so on and so forth. If the Book of the Vishanti is really something that he hasn't discovered yet, and that it's really something that exists out there, and that power is something he's never tapped into, then what it would mean is that Doctor Strange is 20% as powerful as he will become, right? His power will amplify 4 times over what it is right now, and that'll be just ridiculously OP. Now, that's assuming that's the case. Right, that's assuming that's what's actually going on. Something else that's really interesting too that I've also been mulling over is one of the things Doctor Strange tells Peter Parker in Spider-Man No Way Home is the multiverse is something they know virtually nothing about. And so what this would indicate to me is that Doctor Strange is not traveling the multiverse of his own volition. He's not leading anything. That is actually America Chavez who's showing him everything. Like, she's the one giving him the tour of the multiverse. She's the one showing him where everything's at because he doesn't know where anything's at because he's never really traveled the multiverse multiverse before, outside of presumably that one time when the Ancient One sent his mind throughout the multiverse in Doctor Strange 1 when he was questioning whether or not she was legit. And that's it. But like outside of that, America Chavez is showing him everything. And where he's like, okay, we need more power. Like I need like more power or something. She's like, well, there's this book that kind of sits out there in this place, this citadel that looks like it was destroyed. Let's go check it out. And like, it's the Book of the Vishanti. I don't know. I'm kind of throwing out crazy ideas here. The reality is, I mean, maybe it really is Nightmare manipulating things behind the scenes, right? But like, why? Like, what benefit is there? Because here's the thing. When it comes to Nightmare, Nightmare's power is not predicated on the power of the person who is experiencing a nightmare. The reality here is that the Scarlet Witch experiencing a nightmare or experiencing a dream and Nightmare feeding off of that is no different than like some girl named Jane who works as like a typist in some legal firm somewhere and like is going out with her friends Friday night to get a few drinks, and maybe some guy will ask her out. It's no different than like just some plain Jane girl who drinks Starbucks in the morning. What makes a difference in terms of how much of that energy Nightmare can feed off of is the potency of the dream, how intense that dream is, right? So if Jane has this just crazy, intense dream about some guy she met at a bar with a Spanish accent that was just so sexy that she just has like this crazy, physically intimate dream. If that dream is more potent than the dream that Scarlet Witch has, then Nightmare will feed off more energy from Jane than he will from Scarlet Witch. So that's kind of how that works. More so than that, the more people that are sleeping at any particular point in time, the more power Nightmare has. So in Marvel Overture, for example, there was a point where Nightmare put the entire Earth's population to sleep and then fed off all that energy, right? It was an eternal slumber, non-stop dreams until Nightmare was presumably defeated. But until that point in time, Nightmare's power was so extreme. He basically he defeated and killed Galactus, the Celestials, Eternity, Infinity, the Living Tribunal. No one could stop him because his power was basically limitless, right? It was just an unlimited source of power from billions of people who were all dreaming in perpetuity. And that was it, right? It was nuts. You know, so the real question here, if this really is Nightmare operating behind the scenes, unless they're changing things up, and they're saying that like Nightmare's power can be expanded upon if the person whose dreams he's manipulating are that powerful, then he can literally channel their own power for himself, which is entirely possible. The MCU plays by its own rules. Unless they're doing that, it would make more sense if there were some point in the trailer where it's like the world is stuck in a state of slumber and nobody knows how to wake them up. Then like that would be a surefire guarantee Nightmare's in this movie. Like that's exactly how you would know. But if there's ever a point over the course of these trailers, if there's ever a line in these trailers where it indicates the world has fallen asleep and like Doctor Strange doesn't know how to wake them up, right? That's when you know Nightmare's involved. But until that point, unless they've changed him up, there doesn't really seem to be an indication of why Nightmare would be involved here, outside of Scarlet Witch just saying the word Nightmare, and the word Nightmare being mentioned a few times over the course of the trailers. I'm not saying he's not in it, right? I mean, it seems fairly on the nose in this recent trailer, right? Like, Nightmare. Like, it's almost like she said, like, the way that she says it in the trailer, it's almost like she's telling someone Nightmare is the one behind all this, right? It's just kind of how it feels when she says it. So, again, I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing out some crazy ideas here. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section, right? Let me know what you guys think about all this. Either way, I am excited for this movie. I can't wait to see it. But thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.